The Subcommittee on Space and Aeronautics will come to order. Good morning and welcome to today's hearing entitled Spurring Economic Growth and Competitiveness Through NASA-Derived Technologies. In front of you are packets containing the written testimony, biographies, and truth and testimony disclosures for today's witness panel. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. I would like to begin by thanking our witnesses for taking time from their busy schedules to appear before us this morning and share their insight about the role NASA has played in spurring technologies that yield economic growth and keep America at the forefront of global technological competitiveness. I realize you and your staff devoted considerable time and effort preparing for this hearing, and I want you to know that your expertise will help inform this committee and Congress during the coming months and years. In the public media, discussions of NASA's general contributions to society are often distilled down to Tang and Teflon. Yet NASA-derived technologies have paved the way for innovative advances in the medical field, environmental stewardship, and public safety. Today's hearing will only skim the surface in highlighting the direct economic and societal benefits investment in NASA has generated. Since 1976, NASA has documented well over 1,700 successful examples of technology transfer and commercialization. But despite decades of demonstrated success, NASA's budget has remained essentially flat even as other R&D agencies are seeing increases. Investment in NASA's technology transfer activities, however, has seen a drastic decline in recent years. A recent NASA Inspector General audit on NASA's technology and commercialization efforts concluded that NASA has missed opportunities to transfer technologies and that industry and the public have not fully benefited from the NASA-developed technologies. The IG found a general lack of awareness among NASA program managers about the technology transfer and commercialization process, and that many personnel did not understand the range of technologies that could be considered as technological assets. Furthermore, the report found that the number of patent attorneys and dedicated innovative partnership office staff and related funding was insufficient given the technology transfer and commercialization potential. The IG recommended NASA implement a review of the policy process and implement new procedures and training requirements to ensure NASA personnel were fully aware of the process and their responsibilities. The IG also recommended that NASA reassess the allocation of resources for technology transfer. This committee will follow closely NASA's implementation of these recommendations. The IG report took a look at formal NASA processes in place, but it begs the question, does technology transfer happen in other informal ways? And if so, how can NASA best marry entrepreneurs with the technologies it has already developed or those that it may still need for future missions? Exploring both traditional and non-traditional means for technology transfer to the private sector is equally important if we hope to leverage space technology development as an engine for economic growth and U.S. competitiveness. Today's hearing will explore positive examples of partnerships between NASA and the private sector, yielding American-made technologies beneficial to both NASA's space exploration mission and to society as a whole. We will also examine what strategies and programs NASA uses to disseminate technology into the private sector and identify the greatest challenges the private sector has in working with NASA to more quickly transition ideas into new products. I look forward to today's discussion and wish to again thank our witnesses for their presence. I now recognize Mr. Costello for an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you for calling the hearing today. I have a brief opening statement which I will enter into the record so that we can hear from the witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Costello. If there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I would like to introduce our panel of witnesses, and then we will proceed to hear from each of them in order. Our first witness is Dr. Mason Peck. Dr. Peck is Chief Technology Officer for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, where he serves as the agency's principal advisor and advocate on matters concerning technology policy and programs. Prior to joining NASA, Dr. Peck was Associate Professor in the School of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering at Cornell for 8 years. He earned his Ph.D. in Aerospace Engineering at the University of California at Los Angeles. Dr. Peck has a broad background in aerospace technology, which comes from nearly 20 years in industry and academia. Our next witness is Mr. George Beck, Chief Clinical and Technology Officer for Impact Instrumentation Incorporated. where he is responsible for the conceptualization and development of new critical care medical devices. He previously worked for Wiley Laboratories at the Johnson Space Center, where he led a team of scientists and engineers on work to develop a new generation of medical equipment for use on the International Space Station and Space Shuttle. At this time, I'd like to yield to the gentlewoman from Maryland, Miss Edwards, who will introduce our next witness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and to our ranking member. It gives me really great privilege to be able to introduce Brian Russell, who's the CEO and founder of Zephyr Technology in Annapolis, Maryland. And just to give you a little bit of background, Mr. Russell received his Bachelor's of Engineering degree from Auckland University in New Zealand and is a subject matter expert in analog electronics, communications, and physiology. He holds 3 patents and several more provisional applications in the area of physiological sensing using smart fabric sensors. Zephyr Technology is headquartered in Annapolis, Maryland, has investors like Motorola, 3M, and investors that understand government and business, and employs 35 people at Zephyr, and is a global leader in the art and science of remote physiological status monitoring, or PSM. I am delighted to be able to welcome Brian Russell to the committee today, and know that we're proud, as all of our states are in Maryland, of the kind of relationship that's developed between the private sector and the public sector, and the innovation and the technology exhibited by Mr. Russell and by Zephyr Technology, and welcome his testimony today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. Our next witness is Mr. John Villa, Vice President for Strategy, Innovation, and Growth at Pratt & Whitney Rocketdyne. Mr. Villa has enjoyed a 28-year career with Rocketdyne and was most recently the Vice President and Program Manager for the J2X Earth Departure Stage Engine Program for NASA's Space Launch System. He earned his bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from California State University, Northridge, and an MBA degree from the Anderson Graduate School of Management at the University of California in Los Angeles. Our final witness is Mr. Richard Albrecht, Vice President of Moog Incorporated. Dr. Albrecht has spent the bulk of his 40-year career at Moog after having earned his BS, MS, and doctorate degrees in mechanical engineering from Cornell University. Welcome to you all. As our witnesses should know, spoken testimony is limited to 5 minutes each. After all witnesses have spoken, members of the committee will have 5 minutes each to ask questions. I now recognize our first witness, Dr. Mason Peck, for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Chairman Palazzo, Ranking Member Costello, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on NASA's technology transfer and commercialization efforts, and how investments in cutting-edge research and development efforts such as those seen through space exploration can benefit the entire nation. On a personal note, I'm honored to be serving as NASA's chief technologist. As the NASA Administrator's top advisor in technology, I'm responsible for a number of things, and that's guiding strategic agency investments in technology, facilitating technology transfer, partnerships and commercialization activities across the agency, advocating externally on behalf of NASA's R&D programs, demonstrating and communicating societal impacts of NASA technology investments, and overseeing executive management of NASA's space technology program. As we seek to achieve our national objectives in human space exploration, aeronautics, and scientific discovery, we share with the public the technical advancements we make so that our nation may benefit from these new ideas in other areas, such as efficiencies in manufacturing, advanced medical procedures and protocols, increased agricultural yields, and cleaner, safer transportation. NASA's innovations also stimulate the growth of our innovation economy. Knowledge provided by weather and navigational spacecraft, efficiency improvements in both ground and air transportation, supercomputers, solar and wind-generated energy, improved biomedical applications, including advanced medical imaging, as well as the protective gear that keeps our military, firefighters, and police safe. All of these have benefited from our nation's investments in aerospace technology. NASA provides America with unique capabilities because we take on extraordinarily difficult problems in technology and science. By taking humans to inhospitable places, we learn key survival skills, like keeping people healthy when the nearest hospital is days away. This translates into benefits like the advanced ultrasound devices created in partnership with NASA, Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit, and the Company Epiphan in Springfield, New Jersey. Using a portable ultrasound machine, a non-physician can, with minimal technical know-how, send medical imaging from remote locations for consultation with experts. This device is now employed by emergency medical personnel around the country, as well as by coaches and sports teams. It's just one of hundreds of examples of how solving technical problems in aerospace also leads us to invent technologies that make life better right here on Earth. It's a single example, but it's one of nearly 2,000 that NASA has collected in its annual spin-off publication. We'll be glad to provide examples of that publication to you. I've also brought with me a couple of other examples of very compelling spin-offs. I've got them right here. Products derived from NASA technology. So first let me point out this. It's called the Rescue Pod. It increases blood flow to the brain and heart during CPR. It doubles the systolic blood pressure and increases survivability. It's used by our armed forces overseas and our EMS units around the country. It was designed as an emergency contingency device to regulate blood flow of astronauts transitioning from the reduced gravity environment of space back to Earth's gravity, but now it saves lives, and it came from space. We also talk about microbac, and there's a couple samples here of sand. Both of them were taken from the Gulf shores after the Deep Horizon oil rig spill. One was treated with a solution developed by NASA through our SBIR program. That's a Small Business Innovation Research Program. Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama and Microbac International, Round Rock, Texas, developed a phototropic cell for water purification in space. Inside the cell are millions of photosynthetic bacteria. That formulation is now used for the remediation of wastewater systems and waste from livestock farms and food manufacturers, but strains of that same SBIR-derived bacteria also feature in microbial solutions that treat environmentally damaging oil spills, from the dirty sand right here to the clean sand that I've got in front of me. So, and then my cell phone. Most of us have one of these. I'm holding up a standard smartphone here, and I'm not about to tell you that NASA invented the cell phone, but NASA did bring you the cell phone camera. It's right in there. One of our inventors, Eric Fossum, out of the Jet Propulsion Lab in California, designed and developed that CMOS camera on a chip that drove the prices of digital imaging sensors low enough that modern cell phones now have camera quality capabilities. It's a particularly striking example because NASA technology finds its way into our pockets. So NASA technology is all around us. It's making our lives better, and we have hundreds of these stories to share. We do this through our annual spin-off publications. It's a long-standing NASA tradition where the agency publishes a report on some of these annual technology transfer successes. Let me move on to talk about NASA's commitment to tech transfer. We've added technology transfer to the top level, agency-wide performance goals that are reported annually to the Office of Management and Budget. We do have room for improvement, though. You mentioned the IG report. They concluded that our NASA personnel lack awareness of the agency's technology transfer policy requirements. Assets aren't consistently identified or fully understood. Innovators lack awareness of new technology reporting processes, and new reports are inaccessible. NASA agrees with these findings, and we're taking advantage of that report to make improvements in the program. I've got a number of things I can offer here, but my time's about up. So in closing, let me offer you with a couple of final thoughts. We're discussing today NASA's considerable success in tech transfer and commercialization, but we have to remember that these great spin-offs rely on NASA having an ongoing, robust investment in research and technology. If we don't create new technologies, we'll have no new transformational capabilities, new industries, new economic growth and jobs, or tech transfer as a result of all those. This is why continued investment by America in research and technology programs, such as NASA's Space Technology Program, is essential. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your support and that of the committee. I'd be pleased to respond to any questions you or the other committee members may have.
Thank you, Dr. Pack. I now recognize our next witness, Mr. George Beck, for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the owners of Impact Instrumentation and the employees. We're a small business in New Jersey, and this is a unique opportunity for all of us. Our relationship with NASA has not been a traditional spin-off. It's actually been more of a spin-in. Impact Instrumentation has developed and manufactured life support equipment used by the Department of Defense and other government organizations, as well as civilian care providers for the last 35 years. While I was a member of Wiley Laboratories at the Johnson Space Center, our group modified an impact ventilator that was currently being used by the military to transport critically ill and injured warfighters back and forth from Iraq and Afghanistan. We developed the device to answer the needs for space and improved its capability so that it could work in a bidirectional manner. While the modified ventilator was never used in space, its development helped identify a method whereby NASA and industry could work cooperatively to leverage commercial technology for space. Working together, we've developed a number of prototypes for advanced life support devices that replace a suite of therapeutic and monitoring equipment. In addition, Impact has completed development of a new ventilator that is deployed with our forces that has also been tested by NASA with the anticipation that it would replace existing equipment on the space station when it is retired. That said, our biggest leverage has really been the cultivation of a new generation of young engineers and researchers that are working at NASA, at Impact, or in academic centers, or have left to start their own small businesses. The Space Act Agreement created a government, industry, and academic partnership that has allowed our group to work on a series of medical challenges, sharing an institutional knowledge and experience of the organizations while developing solutions that currently now benefit warfighters, astronauts, and civilians. So I look forward to answering any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. I now recognize our next witness, Mr. Brian Russell, for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Chairman and members of the committee, it is an honour to appear today before you to represent our friends and partners at NASA. Zephyr is a global leader in the art and science of remote physiological monitoring, or PSM. That's how we became partners with NASA. The story of that partnership illustrates the profound benefits of NASA funding. That funding spurs and accelerates research, technology and innovation that in partnership we're helping to save lives and make people fitter and healthier. Zephyr first became involved with NASA in 2008, where William Toscano and Patricia Cowling's work at the Ames Research Facility, they study people with motion sickness due to zero gravity, fighter pilots and fatigue in airline pilots. They're using the bioharness, which is our comfortable physiological monitoring sensor, to measure people's vital signs, including fatigue, EKG, and other parameters. We're also working with NASA on PHASER, which is a DHS program to save first responders' lives. Through these studies, Zephyr not only serves the interests of NASA, DHS and DoD, they in turn served our needs. We received critical feedback based on decades of their experience that helped us incorporate their experience into our design decisions. Those products are now making major contributions in several very important areas: sports and fitness, special forces and first responder for both training and operations, and perhaps most importantly today, mobile health. Through TISWG, we've partnered with special forces in the Army and the Navy to create a system to not only train, but to monitor persons' safety and health during field missions. Field commanders and medics can make more informed time-critical decisions based on if someone is stationary, moving, dehydrated, had heat stress, or is actually suffering trauma from an injury. So we're improving their mission readiness, safety and training, and extending their abilities in dynamic asymmetric warfare. Zephyr's PSM solutions are currently being used in the Olympics next month, Major League Baseball, NBA, collegiate sports, and even on Formula One race car drivers. A coach can measure and train an athlete to peak performance while preserving his health and enhancing the athlete's health. A terrific dual use of our technology is to help professionals, hospitals, nursing homes, families, and even individuals. Zephyr's web and smartphone system called Zephyr Life allows nurses to monitor real-time parameters in the hospital, and doctors remotely can measure that anywhere in the world. This technology is selling now. The availability in large part is due to the researchers at NASA. Working with NASA gave us the information and feedback we needed to move from the realm of science fiction into the mainstream. And Zephyr is giving back. NASA was deeply involved in the rescue of the 33 Chilean miners that were trapped 2,000 feet below the ground last year. Because of our experience with NASA, Zephyr was called on for help. We provided bioharnesses, monitoring software, and in-field support. Doctors were able to monitor the miners' wellness for the weeks underground to keep them fit and healthy for the rescue, while monitoring them during the extraction and give them immediate medical support once they reach the surface. And now Zephyr is sharing all of that data collected during those dramatic weeks with NASA. It is the only event in recorded human history that mimics the conditions of long-endurance space travel, where the nearest doctor may be a very, very long way away. This brings me to my concluding point. The scientists and legal department at NASA understood us, they gave us a simple process and brought us in as partners. As a result, Zephyr has improved and advanced its products which are truly dual use, helping doctors, patients, athletes, soldiers, firemen, and all of us and our families who want to stay fit and healthy, including NASA and its astronauts. This success has let us grow and employ more people. Some of those advancements from working with NASA we could have predicted, but some we couldn't have imagined when we started. So please allow me to finish where I started. Because of this, the really basic truth of this testimony is the funding that NASA has and the way it has helped us has truly made a difference. Thank you. And do we have a video to show now or at the end? Okay. So the video I'd like to show now is the latest release of a sports product that's this is the sports application. We've just delivered this auto to Sports Bragg, Fort Bragg. It's used on athletes as well.
Sweat, the drive, the determination, the burning desire to be the best. You can see all of that on the outside, but there are even more important things to see on the inside.
The gauge is showing heart rate on one side. In this case, David is at 150 beats a minute. His breathing is at 41 breaths per minute. We're also measuring the core body temperature.
This is a data readout from Zephyr Technologies' PSM Training Echo, the industry-leading monitoring solution. It measures a wide array of physiological activity on up to 50 athletes simultaneously at distances of up to 1,000 feet. The system streams all of that data live to a computer or tablet and records it for later review.
What's amazing about what the team's done on the software is made all this complex data very easy to read and simple to understand, because after all, a coach wants to tell somebody to run faster, hit the ball, not have his head down at the laptop all the time.
This real-time visibility into the inside workings of each individual athlete's body is unprecedented. PSM Training Echo and Zephyr's Omnisense software measure and report heart rate and heart rate variability, breathing rate, accelerometry, speed, recovery, skin temperature, and core temperature. This single device also measures G-force, an athlete's explosiveness from a stationary sprint start or from a jump, along with jump height, flight time, and peak acceleration. It's this sophisticated sensor device, the Zephyr Biomodule, that takes the readings from the athlete's body. The biomodule can be mounted on the athlete in 3 ways: with the Zephyr Bioharness, which straps around the athlete's chest; with the Zephyr Patch, which can be attached near the sternum, on the pectoral area, and even on the athlete's back; or with Zephyr's new high-tech compression shirt. All 3 options are comfortable and do not restrict the athlete's movement. With all of the critical data it provides, PSM Training Echo is already revolutionizing the way coaches coach, the way athletes train, and the way teams perform.
So I know what their capacity and capability is, I know how they're performing, and I know are they training in the zone I need them to train in to actually reach that capacity, but in a way that's safe and going to keep them injury-free. So this really is the ultimate tool to look after lots of people at once, and the technology is in the background. You don't even know it's there. All you get is the results.
PSM Training Echo not only accurately measures an athlete's potential and progress, it gives coaches the tools to train athletes to their peaks and turn that potential into reality. Zephyr, measure life anywhere.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. I now recognize our next witness, Mr. John Villa, for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Chairman Palazzo and distinguished committee members, thanks for taking the time to have some talks on this very important subject to our nation. There's been a lot of debate on what the value of NASA is to outside of the space world, and of course everyone mentions the Teflons, Tangs, memory foam mattresses, but rocket engines are a little more obscure, and you might be wondering exactly what does that have to do with anything else but going into space. Well, to do that, you really have to understand what's so special about these machines. Now, they're what we call high energy density machines, or simply put, they create a lot of energy in a relatively small space, and it creates new engineering and multidisciplinary skills which are very hard to duplicate anywhere else, but they have applications across the board. Pratt & Whitney Rocketdyne's been launching satellites, astronauts since the beginning of the space program. And we're currently launching most of the DoD satellites today, and we have a long heritage in harnessing this really specialty engineering. A good example of what one of these machines is the Space Shuttle main engine, the RS-25. This is a machine that it takes liquid hydrogen, which is the second coldest liquid in existence, combines it with oxygen, and it produces steam at about 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit and throws it out at about Mach 3, all in the space of about a moderate commercial jet engine. Yet it produces a thrust of 10 747 jumbo jet engines. In just pumping the hydrogen, it has to produce 70,000 horsepower, and that hydrogen is then used to cool the chamber in the nozzle, which is directing that steam, which is operating at well past the boiling point of steel. It would evaporate in seconds if we didn't do this. So the amount of different technologies that goes into doing this is staggering. It has to control itself 50 times every second just so it keeps at the right thrust level and uses the propellants in the right combination as it ascends into orbit. In developing the Space Shuttle main engine, it really drove advances in material science, combustion modeling, high-speed turbomachinery, thermal management, structural assessment, safety engineering, advanced manufacturing, and rapid health management. By investing in pushing this state-of-the-art, it really created a source of intellectual capital that is unparalleled anywhere in the world. As the engine development continued, so did the learning. We were able to try new processes, we were able to test them out on real machines, and we learned a lot while we were doing it. These multidisciplinary advances gained from this investment enabled us to develop the first commercially developed large rocket engine, the RS-68, which today powers the Delta IV launch vehicle. Just recently, the Delta IV launched a national security payload on June 29th. It's the largest hydrogen engine, and we did it commercially because there was going to be a large demand in how many launches we needed. Well, that demand never materialized. In fact, the launch market's been flat for the last several decades. And with new international entrants coming into the market, it's become a very difficult place. So a company like us, who is a commercial company, really requires something to expand our business. So spin-offs are the only place we can go, realistically. Now, we have a long history of doing this. In the past, we've commercialized water pumping technology, which is based on how we pump propellants in a rocket engine. We've spun that off. Jet skis are a result of that. And so there's that kind of a thing. We've also done selective laser sintering, making plastic parts, 3D parts printing. We helped pioneer that in the mid-90s in order to make complex rocket engine parts, but since then we've spun off the business to service the rest of industry. And so that technology is a direct outgrowth. There's other examples as chemical lasers, hydrogen recombiners, and flue gas cleaning devices. And those are all basically byproducts of this multidisciplinary skill. Today, we're taking this expertise and focusing it largely on energy. The energy market is huge and growing. The world has a constant need for energy, and we need to get it cheaper and cleaner. And so by applying rocket engine technology, we find that there's many opportunities in this area. One of the key areas is in solar electric power plants. We're building a solar electric power plant outside of the desert in Nevada that stores electricity and then can dispatch the solar electricity at night so we can produce electricity throughout the evening. That's a world's first. The ability to capture the heat of 1,000 suns in a collector is directly derived from our cooling technology experience. We're also working on a gasification device. It's a compact, high-pressure, high-temperature gasification device that can take coal, petcoke, and biomass and convert it into syngas. This syngas is used in chemicals. It's used. It can be used to make fuel. It can be used to make various other products. Our gasifier operates at higher pressures and temperatures, so we get a 90% reduction in pressures and temperatures, 20% reduction in plant capital cost, and a 15 to 20% reduction in end product costs. All this while giving a 30% reduction in water usage and a 10% reduction in CO2 emissions. Other technologies that are going along, we're working on a hydrogen generator, a downhole steam generator so we can go after heavy oil production from deep and cold locations, acoustic generators to improve hydraulic fracturing, and a number of other areas, including very efficient power plants, which can increase the efficiency of electricity generation by 30%. We're partnering with many folks, including the DOE and major oil companies, in doing this. It's real important that we have an energy policy or a NASA science policy that continues to make the technology that allows us to go forward and create spin-offs. And that means we have to keep investing in development as well as production, as well as coming with new technologies. Having production allows you to measure quantify the measurement of the technologies and what they can mean for you. The development allows you to take these very difficult things and bring them to a point where spin-offs are even possible. And finally, the advanced technology has to be there so you can really push the bounds. There's no commercial case for investigating these commercial bounds because the payback is so uncertain. So the NASA technology is really that seed corn that allows you later to go on and do that. And that's really where the NASA policy has to be strong, and they have to really focus. So we would like to ask that NASA be continued to have this whole portfolio of things. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Villa. I now recognize our final witness, Dr. Richard Albrecht, for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Thank you very much for this invitation to testify this morning. Background on Moog. We're a company that started in Western New York about 50 years ago. It was actually a spin-out of Cornell University at the time. And our core technology we describe as precision motion control. We control flight controls on all sorts of commercial and military aircraft. Same sort of technologies applied on wind turbines, all sorts of power generating. We've been a partner with my pal here from Rocketdyne for about 40 years. We do the steering. So we started working on NASA programs in the Mercury program in the 1950s and continued evolving our technology as NASA's needs evolved, eventually developing very complicated there are 4-channel redundant flight controls that were applied on the space shuttle. These are for not only steering the rocket engines as it's launched, but also the flight control surfaces as the shuttle was landing. That formed a core technology for us in redoing redundant flight controls. So what is different about that? If you look at the NASA missions, some missions of NASA I would call are hard missions. Putting something into space to begin with was a hard mission. What's really hard is doing a manned space program. So why is that? To begin with, you have obviously people involved with all of that. What that means is that the probability of failure has to be orders of magnitude less than you're willing to stand for when you're just trying to launch a satellite. So that's a really, really hard problem. And the other aspect of that is it becomes very public. There's lots of press coverage on that. Other satellites are launched, and you read in the paper 2 days later that a $100 million satellite failed to reach orbit. People go, oh, so what? If you have that happen with a manned space program, it's all over the front page that evening. So it's a really hard problem, and I think that NASA should focus its efforts in the future on really hard problems, and I'll show you why. Having developed that sort of technology to begin with entails not only developing the hardware, but you also have to develop a whole series of other processes and technologies to support doing that. The systems design analysis and integration capability, the design tools, new materials have to be qualified and learn how to fabricate them. All kinds of new fabricating and measuring techniques have to be developed. And finally, we end up with a design. The key part about that is that there is a design team that works on all of that. So it's not just a single person or just a couple of people that are doing this creative sort of work. There's a whole team that enables doing all of that. And that's what I think is really important for NASA to realize, is that the technology that you're developing is not just in the drawings and the reports and the hardware that's built. What's really important is you're building a capability of a team of people who understand how to take on a really, really hard problem. And as a result of doing that, they develop the confidence to be able to take on other really hard problems. So you build this culture of innovation in a company that's able to do really hard things. And that's what we've done with this. So today, we have all of the flight controls on the F-35 aircraft. We have all of the flight controls on the new 787 at Boeing. We also won the contract at Airbus on the A350. This is the first time Airbus has ever gone outside Europe for that scale of a subsystem within the aircraft. So East Aurora, New York has become the global center for redundant flight controls. But then we've also taken the same sort of technologies and applied it to all sorts of other applications for other kinds of launch vehicles, military aircraft, commercial aircraft, business jets. And we also take it and apply it in industrial markets, wind turbines, undersea applications of all kinds. So it's that core technology that we developed starting with NASA in the 1950s that's enabled us to move into all these other fields. So a couple of key messages with this. It seems to me that NASA is it's a key turning point here. What's happened over the last 40 years is that the technology for launching things into space has become ubiquitous. You see people like Iran and North Korea are able to launch satellites. That's not hard anymore. There's a lot of people able to do that. What's really hard still is manned space, and that will continue to be a very hard problem. And that's where NASA ought to focus its efforts. Deep space programs, the same way. The technology to do the deep space probes and also do the Mars rovers and that kind of thing, it's a really hard problem. And those are the sorts of things that NASA can really provide the funding to advance the technologies to enable us to repeat what we did starting with the NASA projects in the 1950s. We're working on a couple of new projects right now that I think are indicative of that sort of thing that NASA could really help with. We're developing what are called green propellants. Hydrazine that's used for a lot of applications in space is a really nasty fluid. And we've been working actually with Swedish Space in developing green technologies that you can actually take it, it's like alcohol. You can spill it on your hands, won't hurt you at all. And the other is things like small satellites. Professor Peck can speak on that a lot more than I can. But that is going to enable a lot broader usage of space than previously. And NASA is in a position to be able to advance the technologies for doing small satellites that commercial people are just never going to do. And to me, that's the kind of leadership position that NASA ought to be taking in sponsoring these projects and the technologies that can become applicable across a wide range of applications. I don't think MOG is unique in that. You know, you've heard of some of the other people here. We see the people on either side of the systems that we have on the NASA programs and have seen what some of our other people have done. But the other thing we have seen, we're pursuing the new launch vehicles on Constellation and Orion and the derivatives of those programs. We won about 3 times what we thought we were going to win 5 years ago on that. So why is that? It's because a lot of the people who used to build that hardware have dropped out and are no longer competing. The reason is they lost their technology teams. They just simply didn't have the capability internally. It wasn't the will, they just didn't have the assets internally to be able to do the work. So one of the things that NASA really needs to think about, and I think it's a real challenge for this committee to think about, is to set program goals, very specific timetables, very challenging technology targets, and then stay with them and fund them consistently. If you don't fund them consistently, the design teams don't stay together, and you lose the fundamental capability. If there's one message you can take from me today, that's the thing you guys ought to really focus on. So thank you very much.
Dr. Albrecht, thank you, and I thank the panel for their testimony. At this time, I'm going to yield as much time as needed to a very special guest who has joined us. He's a member of the Science, Space, and Technology. Is Mr. Ralph Hall of Texas, the chairman of the full committee on Science, Space, and Technology.
Thank you very much, and I thank you for calling this meeting, and I thank you gentlemen. Is there a lady there? I don't have good eyes. Yes, probably the one that wrote most of your work. For the information you gave us, and I will read and study that on my airplane going back to Texas today. I won't have any questions, but I will just say that NASA has developed a lot of innovative technologies that weren't supplied, and what NASA needs to do, as the last gentleman made some suggestions, I think they need to think about how to use the funds that they are getting. I think NASA's made some pretty desperate decisions in the last 3 years. Maybe they felt constrained to, but they've thrown money right and left. And when the president ran a line through Constellation, he put us on the road to lose our space station. I know that's not what this is about. This is about new breakthroughs, and we need it, but we need to know how to supply those. And Republicans and Democrats were very close together on what we'd learned and were doing up to the time Constellation was cast aside. I'm not going to comment on that. I think you tell how I feel about it, but we have advanced aircraft and spacecraft design and technologies that apply to our national security even, and certainly to public safety. And if you want to see how we're really treated by the appropriators, just look at Figure 4 of the R&D and FY 2013 budget request. It goes all the way down to where it looks like we have to pitch some money into the budget. I don't understand the bottom part of that out there, but we're not even keeping pace with inflation. We're in a desperate situation. The last 3 presidents did not help us any at all. We got to pray for this president. I pray for him myself, but I looked up the other day and God was rolling his eyes at me, so I don't know if that's anything that's going to really have any effect or not. But I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your time. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Dr. Peck, in your testimony, you mentioned the magazine that y'all put out, the spinoff that lists all the success stories through technology transfer and partnerships with small businesses. And I just, on page, you don't have to go to this, but on page 84, there's one such small business that actually is in my district in South Mississippi that has partnered with Stennis Space Center. It's called Envision. It's a minority woman-owned business. And the product, and I'm not going to go into the details of the product, but it's something in our region of the world. Emergency response is just second nature, and they developed a product that has been used in Hurricane Katrina, Ike, Gustav, and it's also been used by the Hancock County, or the Mississippi National Guard and the EPA most recently in helping to track the oil spill from 2010 in the Gulf of Mexico. My first question is going to be for Dr. Peck. To what extent do the individual centers develop partnerships with the private sector? What role do the centers play in disseminating technologies available for commercialization, and how is that coordinated by NASA headquarters?
Well, Congressman, the centers, the field centers of NASA, they really are where the tech transfer happens. Headquarters function is one of leadership and coordination and setting guidance for the field centers in their implementation of the tech transfer policies of the agency. The individual field centers work closely with local businesses, but then also companies around the country to develop these partnerships. There's a number of mechanisms that we use, but I will say that is the function that resides at the centers, and that's why we have those centers, because their local expertise is where the strength of NASA's tech transfer program comes from.
What is the appropriate balance between space technology program personnel at NASA headquarters and the centers when it comes to effective technology transfer?
It's a great question, because really the core of the space technology program extends beyond tech transfer, but it's no accident that the space technology program is where the tech transfer function for the agency really is led. The space technology program, as you know, has a broad mission at the agency of investing in cross-cutting, pioneering technologies that will ensure NASA's future, but that also provide the kind of innovation that you've heard discussed here at the panel today. When the space technology program executes on its work, it combines directed work, which happens at the centers, with competed work, where we look for the best ideas wherever they can be found. So there's close to 1,000 projects right now underway, thanks to the space technology program. Many of them go through the SBIR STTR program, which again you understand is the Small Business Innovation Research and Tech Transfer Research programs. But a bulk of them also are run through academic institutions in the form of student fellowships and soon faculty support, as well as the more traditional contracts that we associate with new technology projects at NASA through a number of different programs. The balance of the personnel extends across NASA. There's two issues. There's the issue of what happens within our Innovative Partnerships Office, IPO, where the tech transfer function resides. And there we try to operate a lean function, but there are in fact IPO offices at each center with the responsibility of executing on the tech transfer mission. In addition to that, though, each center does have a center chief technologist and some staff that are meant to advocate for the center's technology, as well as represent headquarters guidance throughout their center. So again, it's a blend where working together, the technology development activity and the tech transfer activity have representation at the centers in terms of staff.
All right. Another question for Dr. Peck. In your testimony, you mentioned the President's charge to accelerate federal technology transfer activities and indicate where NASA has included such goals in its strategic planning. However, the funding requested for research and development at NASA is barely keeping pace with inflation, even as other agencies are reaping the benefits of increased investments. How do you reconcile the increased focus on such activities at the federal level without commensurate funds requested for NASA specifically to meet this challenge?
Well, I believe that NASA historically has been very successful in its tech transfer efforts. We have a proud history of that. In fact, of the 4,700 invention disclosures provided by the federal government a couple of years ago, in 2010, 1,700 came from NASA, so close to a third of the total for across the federal government. Our past success, though, we shouldn't rest on those laurels, as you suggest. We should take advantage of the IG report and your guidance to really focus our efforts on tech transfer. There's a number of things we're doing to respond to the Inspector General's report on this. For example, we're rewriting the technology transfer policies to better match current best practices, as well as address commercialization planning. That new policy will provide a streamlined, broad, flexible approach, and that increased coordination will help NASA in best understanding the value of those identified technological assets. Policy is part of it, also better training for our personnel. Actually being able to focus our efforts on tech transfer requires that the folks at NASA who do the work in developing new technologies also understand that a commercialization plan is necessary and required. They also need to understand how to submit the so-called new technology reports, the NTRs, that actually form the basis of our database of technologies. Fortunately, now we have a new website. It's technology.nasa.gov. It's an opportunity for us to reach out very efficiently to the technology community and the community of small businesses and large businesses who want to partner with NASA. There you can find access to all of NASA's past technologies, as well as a so-called online partnering tool, which allows for a very rapid turnaround, connecting inventors at NASA with opportunities to commercialize them in the private sector.
Thank you, Dr. Peck. Although I have some questions for the other members of the panel, I'm going to be courteous to my other members that are here who also have questions, and with the pending votes being called, I'll now recognize Mr. Costello.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Dr. Peck, we've talked about some examples about technologies that have been discovered by NASA and is commercialized today. I think members of this subcommittee and members of Congress probably know some of the benefits of the work that NASA has done, but there is a tremendous challenge, I believe, in educating the public as to the benefits. Tell us what NASA is doing to improve the public's understanding of the derived technologies and the benefits to the American people and to the world.
Well, Congressman Costello, that charge is one of OCT's, the Office of the Chief Technologist. We have a number of approaches we take. There is, of course, a spin-off publication we've talked about already, but also a website, again, spinoff.nasa.gov, where folks can see the full history of spin-offs from NASA technology. But it's more than that. Rather than sort of passively waiting for folks to come to our website, we actively engage them through social media. The NASA Twitter site has hundreds of thousands of views, and that provides us a way to actively engage the public, communicating NASA's benefits to them. In addition to that, there's a Facebook presence and blogs, a number of ways that we actively engage through social media the public on these kinds of issues. But more than that, when we talk about NASA, we are careful to explain the relevance of what NASA does. So when I'm talking about new technology, although I like to delve into the details a lot, I do my best to remind folks that the technology influences everyone's lives. Again, it's no accident that the space program undertakes difficult challenges, and those difficult challenges are the ones that create the innovations and the new ideas that drive the nation's economy. As de Galbrecht explained, those are the kinds of ideas that make America unique. In pursuing a space program, we undertake these hard problems that motivate our future and provide success for our businesses.
Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing at universities and with teachers? The general public, in my opinion, they understand a little bit about the space program. When I'm home in my district and when I'm traveling, I hear a lot from constituents about we need additional funding for new roads, bridges, highways, for the obvious things that they use in their lives, but I rarely have anyone say to me that you need to put more money into NASA in order to do research and development because they've done all these wonderful things for society. So what are you doing at the common level, I would say, to educate people at a young age about the benefits that have been derived from NASA?
Well, NASA's Office of Education has an extraordinarily successful history of outreach to K through 12. Within the space technology program, we also have a number of educational activities. They're focused on space technology. One is the Space Technology Research Fellows Program, which provides support for college students studying space technology. It's the first time that NASA has provided this kind of support for students. On top of that, we now also have a Space Technology Research Grants Program that sponsors faculty, similar to the NSF Career Award, if you're familiar with that program, that now, again, introduces the opportunity, which I'm afraid I did not have when I was starting off at Cornell University, to be able to engage with NASA in research in space technology. The kind of trickle-down effect that we see by sponsoring students and faculty changes the conversation. It makes NASA very present in the lives of our students, and it motivates students to pursue STEM activities, that's science, technology, engineering, and math, because the space program, quite simply, is exciting. It's also true of aeronautics. We undertake a lot of fantastic work here that motivates people of all age, but particularly students. So I'm proud to say that NASA is the reason why a number of students go into STEM, and we can keep that going.
Thank you. I'll have further questions later, Mr. Chairman.
I now recognize Mr. Brooks from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Peck, Dr. Peck, can you please explain how technologies developed for NASA make their way into other seemingly non-related products? And for example, how was the ultrasound device you cite in your testimony a result of NASA research? And was that technology specifically targeted, or did it evolve from other research? And do you have any other similar examples you can share with us?
Well, Congressman Brooks, the real key to how that happens is our active engagement in technology transfer. We have a technology transfer process and experts at the NASA centers who actively engage with businesses to ensure that NASA technology, which is taxpayer funded, remember, goes to the private sector and benefits the American economy. In that particular example, there's a number of mechanisms whereby tech transfer can happen. It can happen simply because a company comes to NASA, or we can use our communications techniques to actually seek out companies and find opportunities to transfer that technology. I will offer that the tech transfer pipeline at NASA is full, but we can do better to bring new ideas into that pipeline. As the Inspector General's report suggested, we can be doing better to populate that pipeline. But that's just the beginning, because as you suggest, part of how we successfully transfer technologies, how we successfully commercialize, involves taking it from that next step. Merely inventing is not enough. We've also got to engage with the private sector to do so.
Well, a follow-up question. How does NASA engage with the entrepreneurial community to ensure potential technologies are recognized and taken advantage of? Are there means of regular discourse with our nation's technology areas such as Silicon Valley or Research Triangle Park in North Carolina or Cummings Research Park in my hometown of Huntsville, Alabama, if I could boast for a moment, which is the second largest research park in the United States of America and the fourth largest research park in the world?
Well, you're absolutely right, sir, that NASA actively markets its technology to the technical community at large, as not just the areas directly outside of the field center gates. The Technology Transfer Program has an active technology marketing and outreach campaign. I described some of the elements of that already. There's also NASA Tech Briefs. This is a free monthly publication, features over 600 NASA technologies per year. It's also the largest circulation engineering periodical in the country. It reaches over 200,000 people per month. NASA brings its technologies to industry-specific conferences, another method that we use. It brings new sensor technologies to optics conferences or new composites to manufacturing conferences. The agency has also recently started hosting industry-specific events, like a recent automotive conference in Cleveland, to which all the U.S. automakers were invited, and NASA showcased technologies and test facilities that may be of use to that industry. And we've also got a pilot program in Colorado to determine if regional industrial clusters can benefit from an infusion of NASA technologies. Some of this work you can read more about at the nasa.gov/OCT Economic Impacts website. And there's a searchable map where you can see how the investment in SBIR program particularly maps to local businesses and what we do there.
This question is with respect to the other four witnesses, and whoever wants to grab it first can do so. How might an entrepreneur view NASA's technologies differently from NASA program managers and innovators? More specifically, is this being taken into account when devising better practices for dissemination of information?
I can actually echo some of Dr. Peck's work to give a real example of that. The ultrasound work that was done at the Johnson Space Center, I was actually a part of. And one of the things and how these things leverage is the realization and how NASA demonstrates its relevancy to the U.S. populace is NASA has a mission, and because of that mission, it creates a need. We had a need to support our astronaut operators and be able to diagnose illnesses that could occur on orbit. As a result of that, given the limitations of orbit, a technology was identified using ultrasound to be able to diagnose several of the problems that could occur on orbit. Space is unique, but it's also a construction zone. Well, that becomes very relevant because these techniques that were developed in the ultrasound project found their way into being used in ERs on a regular basis in a way that you can be diagnosed in the bed as opposed to having to go off the CAT scan so they can immediately decide whether or not you need surgery. And I have personal knowledge of how the techniques that were developed out of the papers that were published from that program actually led to use directly by our military, so that as our special operators, medics fly to save a down pilot or an operator that's remotely deployed and injured, when we get them, we're able to actually diagnose them in time, in flight, so that we can intervene immediately with a therapeutic intervention. And in addition, we can also have the appropriate care ready for them when they return. So one of the things that NASA has to do in demonstrating this is make itself more relevant to the public. That's sometimes difficult, unless you have a panel like this, you don't hear about how something is what one would think is unique as ultrasound in space actually has real meaning. The work that was done there was published in a series of over 11 peer-reviewed articles in the medical literature and has really changed the way we provide pre-hospital care. No one really knows about that, and somehow that has to be changed, and this committee offers an opportunity to make that known.
In that vein, I'd like to thank the chairman for calling this particular hearing. I've been a long believer in NASA perhaps being the premier federal government agency that has created technological advances that in turn have made America exceptional. And so, Mr. Chairman, thank you for calling this hearing, and also thank you, witnesses, for helping to share the insight you've been able to share today.
I now recognize Mr. Clark from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you recognizing me. I represent Metropolitan Detroit, and I'm a Cornell grad, too, so I'm really happy to be here today, although in a very non-STEM area of fine arts, painting. To respond to the question posed by my good friend, the gentleman from Alabama, about the development of the advanced ultrasound devices, that was also facilitated by a partnership with NASA and Henry Ford Health System, located in the heart of the city of Detroit. This is what I wanted to underscore, is that NASA recognizes the value that Metro Detroit has to commercialize NASA technologies. I appreciate NASA sending out program managers, engineers, and technologists from 3 NASA centers last year. This is something that I encouraged, is a greater partnership between NASA and companies in Metro Detroit. Also, your work with GM in developing robotics technology has been very fruitful. Detroit has huge capabilities. We have the companies that know how to build and manufacture the best products and technologies that could be sold worldwide. We've got the best trained people. We've got a lot of people who are out of work who are willing and eager to work. We also have 3 great research universities, all anchored in the center of Detroit by Wayne State University, along with the University of Michigan and Michigan State University. Metro Detroit, especially the city, also has the capacity for growth. We have a lot of cheap vacant land. So we could build, let's say, a NASA center for advanced manufacturing research and technology, which is something that I would like to ask NASA to consider down the line. My point is this: Detroit is ready and open to do business with NASA. How do you think we can create more Metro Detroit jobs by leveraging NASA-derived technologies? That could be to Dr. Peck or to any of the panels.
Well, if I may, Congressman, I'll start with an answer to your response to your question. Let me just mention briefly the returns that we see on NASA's investment in technology and how that impacts the country. I mentioned the spin-off publication a little while ago. The spin-off represents a fraction of all the spin-offs that ultimately result from NASA. We surveyed the companies represented in spin-off. We got about a 50% response rate, and from that subset of all the possible impacts that NASA has had, we found that over just the past decade, those investments have created 14,000 jobs through NASA spin-offs, over $5 billion in revenue, and have saved over 400,000 lives. So the impact of working with NASA on technologies clearly is felt nationwide. I would offer that specifically for Detroit, there's a nearby NASA center, that's NASA Glenn Research Center. We've piloted an activity there where NASA provides mentorship to local businesses and helps solve technical problems with a small number of NASA expertise hours total, but still it's a way for them to take what may be a tipping point technology and turn it into a successful program. It's through the so-called Magnet program in Cleveland. That's the kind of program that we hope to be able to extend across the nation. It's something that's been successful so far. I will offer that in the context of Detroit specifically, companies that can work with your educational institutions and with NASA can form a three-legged stool of success, if you like, where the expertise from NASA and from education and from the manufacturing community can be a very powerful combination.
Thank you, Dr. Peck. What I'd like to do is follow up with you and to see how we can further advance that, how we can make that partnership happen. There are a lot of companies that are ready to do business with NASA. If I have, I'd like to ask one more question. And how difficult is it for companies to partner with NASA? What barriers do they face in transitioning resulting technologies into commercial products? And what improvements, if any, would enhance NASA's ability to move more quickly the transition of their ideas into new products? How can we best make the commercialization process more effective and efficient?
I think one of the areas that we can really make strides on if we continue programs to their fruition. You know, one of the things that happens is that you spend a lot of money and effort, and then before you actually have to put a stamp of completion on it, you stop. And then you have to reform, make new teams, and you really never get out to industry with that. A good example was when the Constellation program was canceled, the Space Launch System took over many of the systems that carried on from Constellation. The J2X engine was one of the examples. On its first nozzle, we had a situation where we were coming up with a very complex process for making a very difficult manifold. And that manifold was made of sheet metal, and it just wasn't coming together for us. And so we sat around going, well, how are we going to do this? And again, in the problem-solving fashion that is derived by NASA actually make something, we end up going, you know who's really good at stamping sheet metal? Detroit. And we actually went to a company in Detroit, and they did a great job. They stamped it out in record time, and it was a real neat situation. But if you don't continue the project to the point where you have to bend metal and join metal and actually complete it, you really don't get the full benefit of things.
Thank you. Yes.
Mr. Clark, would you like to allow Dr. Albrecht to respond?
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, just coming back to the point that he was making in terms of completing projects, the thing that working on NASA programs allows you to do is to complete the program and demonstrate something, a capability in space. Once you do that, other people are willing to listen to you. But you have to complete the project and have something to show for it. And that's why I'm mentioning in terms of green propellants. We've been struggling for 5 years now trying to get a program to fly green propellants here in the U.S. We've been unsuccessful in doing that. Once we do that, we could sell green propellants around the world, would revolutionize the way satellites are kept in orbit. But you need the initial flight, and NASA's in the position to be able to do that kind of thing. The other commercial guys are very cautious about that because of the risk associated with it. NASA can undertake the risk, demonstrate it. Once you have that, you can take it elsewhere. But you got to complete the project.
Thank you, Doctor.
I now recognize Mr. Rohrabacher from California.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing about the green propellant. Once it is tested and once it is put to use and proven, will it cost more or less than what current?
Would cost a lot less. Okay. Handling hydrazine is hugely expensive. It's not the cost of the fuel, it's the cost of all of the associated support systems that you have to have because it's so toxic. Well, it'll be just dramatically less expensive.
So then it really, what we need to do, and I'll wait till the chairman, get the chairman's attention, is what we need to do is make sure that we provide, Mr. Chairman, his statement about this ultimately being cheaper to go with the green propellant means that we need to be involved in this, and we need to push this and make sure that it doesn't sit on the shelf.
Yep.
And in the end, it'll be cost effective for us. So thank you for that. I'd like to ask about your technology, Pratt, when you were mentioning something that actually creates power at night.
Yeah, what it is, it's a concentrated solar power plant that has a field of about 10,000 mirrors that focuses onto a solar receiver that's on top of a 550-foot tower. It gets the intensity of about 1,000 suns on this receiver. It's a pretty hostile environment, but not so bad compared to a rocket nozzle, for instance.
It doesn't sound like, however, that you'll be getting much energy.
Well, we're making
investment of.
It's actually fairly cost competitive, and what allows us to do is we run molten salt through the receiver, and that molten salt is then put in storage tanks, and now you have a hot reservoir source that you can make steam with throughout the evening. So you can actually get solar power at night, and it actually applies towards base load rather than peaking load, and that's a big deal because that's when you start talking about taking coal offline.
Right, and that's I think if any spin-offs that we have in the future, we're going to find that there's a relationship between energy and what we are developing in space, which leads me to Dr. Peck. Years ago, I was very involved with trying to advocate the development of wireless projection of energy so that we might be able to utilize a satellite as a system of transferring energy from one place in the Earth to the other, or collecting it in the space and transferring it to Earth. Has there been much research on that, or is that just a forgotten project?
Congressman Rohrabacher, thanks for bringing that one up. It is an exciting idea, and I'm glad to report that there are several efforts underway currently at NASA in that particular technology. One is through the NASA Innovative Advanced Concepts Program, which is part of the Space Technology Program within my office. We have a so-called NIAC Phase 1 study, the Solar Power Satellite via Arbitrarily Large Phase Array, that's SPS Alpha. It focuses a modular approach that would one day make a huge orbital platform to be megawatts of wireless power. Now, NIAC is known for those very far-out ideas. In much more nearer term, we had the Centennial Challenges program. You may remember this is our flagship prize competition activity. Prizes have often been recognized as a great innovative way to bring in non-traditional offerers and technologists to solve hard problems. We offered a prize for beamed power in 2005 through 2009, looking at how to beam power to a spacecraft that could rise through the atmosphere using that kind of power. In fact, one of the competitors, Laser Motive LLC, was awarded $900,000 in the 2009 challenge because of the practical demonstration of power beaming. And now, more recently, the Game Changing Development Program, again, one of the space technology programs. In 2011, we awarded approximately $3 million for concept studies to multiple companies for a first phase study called Ride the Light. There's work done by Teledyne Brown Engineering in Huntsville, Alabama, Aerojet in Redmond, Washington, ATK in New York, Laser Motive in Kent, Washington, and a number of others, including JPL, Boeing, and the Aerospace Corporation. These studies show that a cost of a Phase 2 ground-based demonstration wouldn't be feasible in the FY12 appropriated amount for space technology, but it does provide a path forward for looking into this advance research into the future. As you suggest, it is a far-out idea, but it's got some promise, and this is the sort of thing that we pursue through the space technology program, because where else are you going to do it? It's got to be done at NASA.
If we, most people don't know we lose a lot of electricity when it's transmitted over wires, and come to think of it, is there that much loss when we transmit it by beaming it? And that's the type of studies that I'd like to see, because it might even be cost effective to transfer it from space to Earth rather than producing it in Earth and using wires to send it thousands of miles away. One last thought, and I know I just got a few seconds here, and that is, we've heard about the sonogram and some of these other spin-off technologies. I am very interested, and we've heard a lot of questions today about getting the new things onto the market. But once they are in the market, we have private companies that are making lots of money off the jobs that they're doing in the private sector. Is there a payback for NASA? Is there who owns the technology? And should we have a system set up so that if someone has a sonogram that becomes used all over the world, and NASA's technology development was instrumental in developing that, who's got the patent and who's going to get the money, and is NASA going to get anything back? Maybe Dr. Peck or whoever would like to comment on that.
Well, yes, sir. I'll give you a brief response and then maybe save some time for others. Briefly, a lot of the tech transfer activity that we undertake at the agency is based on licensing. The licensing fees can come back to the government through that. Part of it goes to the inventor, in fact, which motivates the...
Well, we should have that, but
right.
Is NASA getting anything back?
Yes, sir.
We are.
And I'll take for the record to provide some details on that.
That would be very nice. That would be very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
At this time, we're going to go into a second round of questions. We're going to ask our members to only ask one question, just in case votes are called. And the first opportunity is going to go to Mr. Russell. I think you raised your hand, and the question was probably centered around what is the greatest barrier your company faced when working with NASA on technology transfer project? Was that similar to what Mr. Clark was going to ask you? But we'll give you an opportunity, and we're going to count that as his question.
Thank you. The point I wanted to make was there's some softer aspects to the value of NASA, which is critically important to small companies like mine. So the fact that NASA is using our product allows us to market that fact, which helps NASA and the general public get wider awareness. So the fact that NASA's used us because they've solved this problem in space for 30 years, that was before people could do remote physiological monitoring due to technology. So when we needed to field it onto special operators, we used NASA's 30-year experience to help us solve that problem for a DoD problem. Then they could take that technology and use it for the washout program on the Air Force, and then DHS used that on first responders. So I think NASA needs recognition that they're using their advanced technology to help other government departments to solve the problem as well. And so then into the general public, we're now monitoring people at home across the country using that technology that's very cheap and is now helping everybody in the general public not only be well, but monitor their chronic disease issues. So I think the fact that NASA has gone into government departments who had their next need and then into the general public at the consumer level helps NASA, and every time we can tell people where the technology came from, I think that is a true value back to NASA that's not just financial, but helps justify why we're here today and helps the general public back the funding for that next hopeful that this technology may help in the future. Whether it's blue sky or deep space travel today, I think there's a very good examples of how it does come down. And I think that experience bringing to us and helps our scientists solve problems and excites them to build the competencies of the teams that have been talked about, as well as get that into Best Buy. I think that's a success that helps everybody.
All right, thank you, Mr. Russell. Dr. Albrecht and Mr. Villa, both of you mentioned in your written testimonies the need for NASA to maintain a clear vision for the future and to continue investing in the hard and challenging technological problems to ensure the United States remains cutting edge. Do either of you have recommendations on ways to improve NASA's strategic vision, such as that the U.S. is consistently pushing the technological envelope?
Well, I think it's a three-pronged approach. First of all, you really do have to have some sort of sustained production so that you can really get that. By going to a continuous process improvement approach, you really get a draw for what's the technology that you can use. The second thing is you always have to have a development program going that actually ends up in product. And that's where you really introduce new concepts into practice. And after it's been introduced into practice, it's practical, it's ready for a further investment into the commercial spin-off. But then you also got to keep that third prong going where you're saying, look, what's impossible today? And then start exploring how you make the impossible possible. And that's where you really start getting the breakthroughs. Now, they're not always practical. Power beaming is a hard thing to do. But once you start making those initial breakthroughs, then you drive it into practice, and then you start getting the commercial spin-off. So it's really, you have to have a pipeline going, and you have to stick to that pipeline, because if you keep changing it over, you don't ever really get the full benefit of it.
Yeah, just to extend on that, to me, the thing that NASA has done well where it's succeeded is when it had a very clear statement in terms of what the objective was on one page. And you need to get NASA on the page, this committee, the rest of the Congress needs to be on the page, and the White House needs to be on the same page. And it has to be clear. It doesn't have to be very complicated language. It doesn't have to be in scientific or engineering terms or whatever. Just a very clear objective in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. And to me, that's the way to the question earlier in terms of engaging the public and how to get the public understanding what NASA does. You have to write it in terms that the local newspapers can write articles about that and say, here's where NASA is going with something. So to me, it's almost a marketing challenge that you have. But it starts with having a very clear, concise statement in terms of what the objective is. And you go back to the manned space program, that's what drove that all the way through the 60s and 70s, which is very clear, continuous, step-by-step, here's where we want to go. And to me, if you did that with all of the rest of the NASA sort of projects, you'd have the same kind of result.
Dr. Albright, I think you'll find a complete agreement with this committee on what you just said. And at this time, I'll recognize Mr. Costello.
I noticed the heads nodding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Villiat, let me ask you. You mentioned at Pratt Whitney what you have learned and what your experience has been with rocket engines and how it was instrumental in your ability to design a rapid mix injector, and you talked about in your gasifier system. Tell me a little bit, if you will, about how this technology, deploying this new technology in commercial systems, how it may have a result on emission reduction and greater use of coal gasification technology in energy generation.
Sure. I mean, the thing that really drives anything into practice is an economic benefit right off the top. By being 90% smaller than the other alternatives that exist today, you get a real benefit in just building the plant in the first place, on the order of like 30% of building the plant. Then a 15-20% reduction in the amount of product that you get out of it for the product you put in. We're also finding that using this technology, we're not as susceptible to the grade of coal coming in. We've been talking to a lot of users of existing plants. They have to specially blend their various coals. And as a rocket guy, I had no idea there were that many different coals, but there are a lot of different coals, and you have to make a special blend so the gasifiers don't have hiccups and they can still keep producing. Ours seems to be pretty insensitive to that, so you can really start using more different grades of coal and still get the same outcome. Now, by getting the higher efficiency, you get a 10% lower amount of carbon dioxide that's produced in it, and it's coming out at a higher pressure, so if you wanted to do carbon sequestration, you have higher pressure to work with, and it's much easier to do that. And then the final benefit is the fact that since we're a dry feed system, we use 30% less water. And I think over the course of things, water preservation is going to be a very big thing in the environmental agenda. And so I think that a lot of people talk about the air pollution side, but we think water conservation is another part of it that makes it economically very attractive.
We obviously can't do this now, but I will be in touch with you later. I'm very interested in pursuing some other questions with you.
That'd be great.
I now recognize Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been working to attract new companies to Metro Detroit. Many of them are startups. And virtually all of them are headed up by very bright individuals who understand that a partnership with NASA could be mutually beneficial. Yet many of them don't understand how to work with government. What steps should a new startup take if they wanted to start a dialogue with NASA on a future likely partnership? And that's to anyone.
As a very small company and a foreigner, we started actually when we were based in New Zealand before we shifted the company wholly to the US. And so we engaged with the EN researchers and subject matter experts in NASA that wanted to work with us in a mutually beneficial way. And that really helped us not have to learn the entire SBIR process and all the contracting to begin with. We actually had a value proposition that we could come to NASA and they could help us with their process. And I think there's been some amazing explanation of the processes that exist. So my recommendation would be figure out what you want to do first and what problem you want to solve rather than head smack into all the bureaucracy that's going to overwhelm you. Because once you have the passion inside NASA and your organisation, everything out, they're enthusiastic. They'll help solve the other problems for you.
Yes.
NASA's also got an active program where we can have mentor-protege relationships with new companies, particularly in hub zones or distressed areas. And we have contract flow downs where a certain percentage of our entire contract value has to go to this kind of a spread. We've had a lot of success on the J2 program. We had a mentor-protege relationship with several hub zone companies where they actually learn how to do government contracting, and we were able to bring them into the supplier base. Kane Tubular outside of Chicago had never worked on rocket components. They did a great job on some heat exchanger coils for us. The company in Detroit who was able to stamp out the panels, we think they're going to fall into our supplier base. But you know, the intricacies of government contracting is something they're going to have to learn. But these contracts give a great opportunity for them to learn that without having to be overcome by trying to bid on them individually. And by going along with these kinds of programs, I think that's a great way for them to become part of the NASA supplier base.
That's great. So I'll reach out to you gentlemen then regarding some partnerships.
May I add something to that?
Yes.
Thank you. Just briefly, I mentioned the online partnering tool already. It's at technology.nasa.gov. That actually allows companies to engage directly with NASA and get hand-holding through the process. It's actually meant to simplify the kind of relationship that Mr. Russell explained can be overwhelming. But thanks to our new approach and using a web-based interface, we think we're simplifying that. We've even gone further to offer licensing available through the internet. So as a small company, if you know that you want to license a technology that's been developed from NASA, you can go to the website, click on it, and procure it right there and then.
That's great. So I know I had one question, but you actually answered my other questions about licensing. Thank you. And I yield my time back.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments and statements from members. The witnesses are excused, and this hearing is adjourned.